Hey guys, what's up? In today's video, I'll show you how you can make an Graph API call from Power Apps without using Power Automate or without creating any custom connector. Yes, you heard it right. We are going to make a Graph API call from Power Apps directly. So stay tuned. Hello everyone, I'm Deepak Shrivastava. Welcome to my channel. So today we're going to create a Power App and we are going to make a Graph API call directly from the Power App. So before we deep dive into how we can achieve that, let me show you a quick demo how I'm using that same functionality. Okay, so what you're seeing right now on the screen, it's a work progress tracker app. If I like to see item versions, I can't really do this in app because when I connect to a SharePoint list or library, it gives me the latest version number. It doesn't give me the previous version. But using the approach that I'm going to talk today, I was able to create this behavior where I can click on the version and now I can see all the previous version of this particular item. I can click on another item and it's going to give me the previous version for that item. And what I'm using behind the scene, I'm making a Graph API call that actually give me all the previous version. Okay, so let me show you how you can use the same functionality in your app. So I'm going to start creating a new app. Okay, so I created this simple app here. And first thing that we are going to do, we are going to add a data source, connect to SharePoint. Okay, so I created a connection for my SharePoint and I'm going to drop a gallery on this screen. Okay, and items going to be my data source that I just connect. Okay. Now instead of using this, I'm going to change this to another icon. Okay. Now what I want, right now this app is showing me all the item coming from that work progress tracker list. Okay, that's the list that I'm going to use today. But I want to make sure that when I click on this small icon, I like to see the previous version of the particular item. And to achieve that or to get the previous version of a given item, there is no direct connection or connector available that give me that information here. So what I need to do, I need to make an API call. Okay, the API, what API I can use, I have an option for Graph API. Now how I know that? If you look at the documentation from the Microsoft Graph, under list item, there is an API called list versions. Okay. And if you read this, what this API is telling me that you can pass the information like this, and this will respond you all the version for that given item. Okay, so we know there is an API that can give me this information. In the Power App, if I go to the data, click on Add Data, search for HTTP. We have this HTTP with Azure AD connection available here. Click on that. Okay, make a new connection. So that's the one option. Another option is if you search for Office. There's something called Office 365 groups. Okay, I'm going to create connection for that as well. So now we have these two connectors or connections available that enable us to make an API call inside the Power App. Let's see how. If I go to my icon and I type HTTP, you have HTTP, that's the name of my connection, invoke HTTP. Right, select that. Now it is saying what is the method of your URL. To know the method, if you go back to the documentation that I was showing you here in the HTTP, so the method is get and this is the URL. Okay, now this URL might be a little confusing, so what you can do, if you click on this try it, so once you click on try it, it will open this window. Of course you need to sign in so that Graph API can work correctly. Okay, so once you signed in, you can see here the method is get, right? So I'm gonna go back to my Power App, and as you type, it's gonna show you, right? So that's the method, comma. Now it is saying what is the URL that you want to fire from here. I'll go back to my Graph Explorer, and this is the URL to get the previous version, right? Double quotes, and I enter that URL. Now if you notice, this URL has a lot of these curly, right? This is where it is saying enter the site ID. okay? Or this is the list ID that you need to replace with. If your list or library that you are using in this app is at the root site, this is my list. And as you can see here, this is at the top label. So in that case, you can just replace the site ID and type root, okay? If it is not at the root label, then you need to replace the root with the GUID of your site, okay? And that you can get by querying the site information. Then you need the list ID. So to get the list ID, go to your list, go to the list settings, and in the browser, you're gonna have this %7b and %7d. Everything that is in between those two things is your ID. Okay, so that's the ID. So you're gonna exclude the %7b from the front and %7d from the end. Copy that, and we're gonna replace this. Okay, so that part is done. Then it is saying items, and you need to pass the item ID. For that, what you need to do, you need to close the double quotes here, press the end, this item.id, and okay. So this will be your URL that will give you the versions for the given item. Everything is good, no error. Let's run this app and click on this button. Click cancel. Now you notice there is no error, so that means your invoke HTTP worked. But let's see what response it is returning us. So if you select that entire thing, you see it's saying data type boolean. That means it is only going to respond to you true or false. Okay, what we need is the actual response. How we can do that, and that's the big question. So to understand what's happening behind the scene, we need to actually see what's happening in this app when we're making those API call from here. So for that, you need to go back and look at this article from Microsoft, Power Platform extension for VS Code. You can actually open your Power App code in Visual Studio. The first thing that you need the Visual Studio Code. You can install. If you search for Visual Studio Code, you can find that, you can install, it's free. Once you install the Visual Studio Code, it will look like this. Go to this small icon here, click there, search for Power Platform. There is an extension called Power Platform Tools. You need to install that, okay? Then go to the terminal from the top, click on New Terminal, and based on this documentation, if you go here, it's saying Canvas command, right? So this is the new feature introduced now in VS Code with this Power Platform extension, and now you can have this command called pack canvas, pack or unpack. Let's see that. So if I type pack canvas, enter, and you see, right? So it's saying the pack canvas has two actions or operation. Pack, this will create your MS app file, that's the source file for your Power App. Unpack is going to unpack that source file and give you the structure. Okay, we are going to use these two commands. And how we're going to use it. If you go to the file, go to the save as, if you click on this computer, what this will do, it will create an MS app file for this app. So we need to do that. So click on this computer, saying file is ready, click download. So now your app file has been downloaded and it will look like this. Next, go back to your terminal, type cd. We just need to go to that folder that we have just created. Okay, cd is change directory. And what we are doing, we are changing the directory from this top label to where our app has been downloaded. So now we are in that same folder. Now we need to write a command. So command is going to be pack canvas, right, that we have seen, unpack. Press enter. When you do that, what it is saying that there is a missing source, that is the directory to the source to be unpacked, and the path, the file name. So for the source is where this file be exported, right? Where you want to export this file. So if I go to my directory, I'm going to create a new folder. So that's the folder where I want this app to be exported. So I will say pack canvas unpack. You need to give the name of your folder, and then ms app, that is the name of the file that you want to unpack. Okay, press enter. So you need to make sure that you are typing it correct. It is sources. Okay, so now the unpack is done. As you can see here, we don't have any error. And if you go back to your folder inside app source, now your app has been exported. Okay. Now the next thing that you need to do, you need to open this. So go to the file, open folder. Okay, select the folder where you just exported. Perfect, right? So now what you are seeing on the left hand side is the entire code for your app. Under package, if you see a folder called WADL, open that folder. And this is what you see here. You have data connection, and we have created two right now. One for HTTP with Azure AD and one for Office 365 group. This is an XML file. Click on that. This XML is controlling this entire connector. What all actions this connector will have and what all information you can pass and receive from this connection. Okay. Now I'm going to just make it a little simple to read. So it has these different sections here. Number one is the grammars. Grammars is nothing but the definitions. And definition is what the request. So request, when you make an HTTP call, what information you will send to this connection and what information you will receive. So you will create those definitions or schema or properties, whatever you want to call it. It will define in the grammars. In the resource, this is where you can define the different method. And I'm going to just quickly show you. So we have this get file content method. If you have noticed here. So we have the invoke HTTP and we have get file content. We have two methods with this connector, right? And these two defined here. So this is the get file content and this is the invoke HTTP. We are using this invoke HTTP. Let's open that one. So if you open this, it has all the information about title, and then we have this request. Request is what we are passing, right? That's the request. It is first thing that it is asking is the method, the URL and other information. You can see the same information here. So this is the presentation of your request. But if you notice here, there is no response. And that's the reason why you are successfully making the request, but you are just receiving response as true and false, because Power App doesn't know how to receive the response or what I'm receiving the response and how I'm going to process that. Okay, so grammar is where you can define the type of response you are going to receive. So we understand the resource. For now, we are not going to make changes to the resource, but we need to define the response that we are expecting when we are making the call. To understand the response, we're going to go back to our Graph Explorer. I'm going to copy this URL to the Graph Explorer, run the query. Okay, so once you fire this Graph API to get the version, this is how you get the response, right? Okay, and let me copy this response and open in another file so we can easily read that. So this is the response that we received. We have the value, okay, and then under value we are getting this same information repeating itself. So that means value is a collection of this information, and what this information is going to include, it has the ID, last modified date and time, last modified by, this is the information about the user, and then we have fields. And fields is nothing but the different fields that we have in that list. So title, modified by, and all other column information, right? So to get this information from that API call, we need to tell the Power App that when you're going to make that HTTP call, this is how you are going to receive the response. Okay. Now, quick tip here. If you see curly, that means this is the property type object. Object means it can have more than one properties in it. If you see this bracket, that means it's an array. It's a collection of the same information. Okay, so let's go back to this file. Under grammar, you have the first thing, the JSON type. You don't need to change that. Then you have some predefined property that has been created by this connector. You don't need to change that. What you need to do, you need to create your own property. Okay, so the first property that you're going to create is for this information. Note one thing: when you are defining those property or definition or schema in this WDL file, you don't need to select every field. You can define the field that you like to get from that HTTP. Okay, as I said, if you see the curly, that means you need to create a object. Okay, so go here and type object name equal to, okay, this is how you can create the definition. Remember one thing, this name can be anything, okay, that's your choice. You can select whatever name you want to select. But once you start going to define the properties, so properties like this property, this name should match with the name that you are receiving. So for example, if you want the ID, or let's say you want the title, it should be the title, and then you say type equal to string. So let me create the other. So this is what I create. I'm trying to get information on the title, modified, description, progress, priority, and due date. These are the column that in my list, and I can match from here. Okay, so we define the schema or definition for the fields. The next what we need to define is for the user. If you look at the user, right, so user is also an object. As you can see here, there's a curly, right? So for this also, I'm going to define the same thing. So the object is user definition. As I said, you can give any name for this particular purpose, but the property name should match what you are getting from this object or the response. This is an object. Then you have the last modified is also an object, because if you see the curly here, correct? So you need to make sure that you create another object for last modified by. So for that, you need to just create something like this. Okay, so this is the object for last modified by. The property name user, as you can see, it's matching with the name user. But this time the type is going to be this. So instead of just saying type is equal to string or something else, what you are saying that this last modified by object will have a property called user that is going to look like this. Okay, so now let's move to the next one. Each version we are receiving this information, right? So we need to define that definition. It's going to include the ID, it's going to include the last modified by, and the fields. And this object I'm calling version definition. As I said, you can name it whatever you want. The property should match. So the first property that we are defining is the ID. So that's the version ID. As you know, I'm receiving this one here. Then we have the last modified by. We already defined the last modified by, and this is the definition for that. So we're going to say type wrap for this. And then we have the last property is fields, and this is type of this object. Okay, so we created this object to get those individual versions. Now this is one version, and as I said, we are receiving the array, right? One item can have multiple versions. So now we need to create an array based on this version definition. Okay, so that is also very straightforward. You just need to say array type reference is this one. This is type of this, and the last thing we need to define is our last property. This is the value, correct? And the value is collection of these different versions that we are receiving. That means object, this is the version response, that's the final response that we have received. And what I am defining, a property name should match, property name should match. So this is the value, and it is type of version, that's an array. Okay, we created our own grammar, our own definition for the response. We need to use that response, right? So minimize the grammars, go to the resources, find that HTTP invoke method, and just after the request, so if you look, there is a request. This is the last. Make sure that you are at the end of the request. And what we're going to define, we're going to define the response, because it was not defined here. Okay, so you type response. So this is how you define the response, open and close. Then what kind of response we are getting, what is the representation of the response. So you say representation media type equals to, and then property called element equal to service colon version response. Okay, so this is where you will tell this HTTP call that when we're gonna make an invoke HTTP, the response that you are going to receive is going to be type application JSON. That's the JSON response, and it is going to be version response. And this version response we have defined in our grammar. So that's our response, right? Again, go to the terminal, open a new terminal window. Now, because we have updated the file, we need to pack it back. Okay, pack canvas That's the command that we are going to use. File folders are in this app source folder, and I'm going to give the name, and then I'm going to run the command. Okay, so that's done. Let's go back to our folder here. And as you can see here, this file got created. Okay, so we made the changes. Now let's go back to our app. And what I'm going to do, go to the file, open, browse, select the file, click open. Okay, so our new file is open now. And if I click here, and if I select this response now, you see here, right, it is saying record. So it has changed from that boolean true false to a record. Now let's see what we are getting. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to create a variable, and whatever response I'm getting from this HTTP call, I'm going to store in that variable result. Okay, and then I'm going to insert another gallery on this screen. Okay, and the item, I'm going to say variable result. Now this is the response that I'm getting from the HTTP call. Now if I press dot, you see now, because I have defined that schema, it is saying value. Now value, you know, right, it is the collection of different versions that we are receiving. If I go here and if I select this item, dot, you see all this information, ID, fields is selected and last modified by. This is what we have defined in our schema, right? So last modified by, ID, fields. All the information now we are receiving here. So for example, I would say this item.id is going to give me the version number. Here I would say last modified by dot users. We have defined that user object as well, right? Dot, and then user object has these different property, display name, email, and ID. So I'll use the display name. And here I would say fields, click dot. Now I'm getting all those different columns that we have defined. So I will say title. Okay. Now if I run it and if I click on this icon, it's going to make a call, and here you go. You are getting all the versions from the Graph API. If I select another item, yeah, so this is how you can actually now make a call, a Graph API call. Now we're talking about the other connector as well. Actually, if I copy all of that, what we have created, okay, and if you go to this Office 365 group XML, I'm going to do the same thing just after the JSON type. Not going to change anything that is already defined. Paste it. Okay. If you go to the resources, this has more method, and that you can check from the Power App. The Office 365 group has many, but there is one called HTTP request. That's what we're going to do. And if you go to this request, very similar to how we have in our HTTP, it doesn't have the response definition. So what we can do, we can go and copy the response definition that we have created for HTTP, copy it and paste it, save it. Okay, and after we save it, we need to do the same thing. We need to pack it. Okay, and once we complete the packing, we will go back to our app. And remember one thing, because we have not exported this latest change that we have made, when I'm going to import, it's going to import from the version that we have exported previously. So it won't have this gallery and everything what we just did. I'm just copying this so I can reuse it. File, open, look for your app file. This is the file. I'm going to open it. Okay, Control A, Control V. Let me drop a gallery here again. Okay, this is going to be the variable result dot value. Okay, and what I'm going to do, I'm going to copy this control again. Okay, so here what I'm going to do, instead of using this action, I'm going to say Office 365 user HTTP request. It has the different way of passing the parameter. So first it needs your API, and second it needs the method, and then it has some other information for which you can just pass. So this is how your Office 365 HTTP request will look like. You will pass the URL, method, and then it also requires some file type. If you are using this for other purpose, you can just pass the empty string there. Let's run it. This time I'm going to make the Office 365 call, and it actually worked like it was working for the HTTP. So if you have noticed that we have did for HTTP and for Office 365, we just copied. Now these are the two different methods or two different type of connection that you can use. I'll leave it to you which one you prefer using in your app. Both work very similarly. You need to open your app, make the adjustment into the grammar, and then also update the response or add the response representation so that app can understand the response that it's going to receive. Yeah, so that's all for today. I hope this video will help you to explore more. Thanks for watching this video. Thanks for subscribing to my channel. Thank you.